Welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast, where today's thought leaders discuss how they're using the latest social media strategies and technologies in marketing, sales, customer service, and HR. Get ready to be inspired as our guests contribute to your digital transformation through their stories, knowledge, and insights into what works in today's digitally connected world. And now, here's Bernie Borges, your host of the Social Business Engine podcast.
Hey there, welcome to episode 214. This is Bernie Borges, CMO of Vengreso and host of the Social Business Engine podcast. Hey, thanks for listening. On this episode, my guest is Autumn Braswell, Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, Enterprise Solutions at iQor. On this episode, Autumn shares the findings of a recent survey published by iQor, namely the CPX 360 survey. It reveals surprising results of the consumer's journey in using digital devices in the connected home. These findings show that 1 in 3 adults experience issues setting up or operating a connected device. The findings provide insights into how digital transformation has reached our living room and kitchens, and how manufacturers and service delivery companies, such as iQor, are challenged with delivering a seamless experience across the 360-degree customer journey and across the entire ecosystem of connected devices, which often includes more than one brand. As Autumn shares the findings of the iQor CPX 360 survey, I encourage you to think about how your company delivers a seamless experience across the ecosystem of your customer's journey. Now, before we transition to my conversation with Autumn Braswell, I want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by SAP. Social Business Journal Volume 11 is a case study in savvy social selling the SAP way. This case study is available for download without a form to fill out. Just click to open the PDF in your browser at vengreso.com/SAP. And of course, we'll link that up in the show notes page at vengreso.com/podcast. And now, here's my conversation with Autumn Braswell, Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, Enterprise Solutions at iQor. Autumn, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Thanks, Bernie. It's a pleasure to be here. Excited about the topic today.
Absolutely. So am I. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Well, Autumn, let's begin with an introduction to your company, iQor. Of course, I'm familiar with the company. I've had the privilege of doing some work with your company, but let's begin with who is iQor and what is your role at the company?
Great. Yeah, iQor is a pretty unique company. Part of our company, kind of our tradition, is in kind of the BPO space. So we handle customer interactions for all things from welcome calls to tech support to back office. But about 4 years ago, iQor acquired a product support company. In that realm, we're very technical. We have engineering expertise across all types of consumer electronic products. And we do everything from reverse logistics to actually repairing the products. And so unique in the fact that we cover both the customer journey and the product journey.
And you're a large company with a global footprint. I believe employee size is north of 40,000. Is that right?
Yeah, we're at 45,000 employees currently and growing. And we have over 60 locations covering 65 different countries. So yeah, very global company and cover just about every kind of client type, from original equipment manufacturers to media to insurance to banking and financial services. So we have a pretty unique perspective on the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, that covers just about everybody. And your role at the company, Autumn?
Yeah, so my role in the company, I wear a couple of hats, which I know a lot of people do in companies. I head up our global marketing organization as well as enterprise solutions and our integrated offering. So the product, when our clients actually buy both the call center and the product support business, is called Link, and I head that up as well.
Fantastic. Big job, big company. You recently did a big survey. So let's dive into that. I'm really excited to discuss that with you, Autumn. The survey is called the Customer and Product Experience 360 survey. Of course, the acronym is CPX 360. So first, Autumn, what is the survey about and why did you conduct it?
Yeah, so as I explained, iQor kind of covers all types of products and the complete service journey. And what we were seeing with the clients we were doing services for is that there is a complexity in the connected home or IoT space that has yet to be addressed. And so what we wanted to do is really go out and survey consumers and understand what issues were they having with connected devices, what was their service journey, and kind of what were their biggest pain points, so that we could bring that back to our clients and really, revolutionize the service journey for the connected home space.
Interesting. Okay. I can only imagine. My brain is kind of going there because, of course, we're both consumers, right? And so I would imagine that when you were looking at the results, you were looking at it through the lens of your company, iQor, and what you do. But I would imagine that also as a consumer, you were kind of thinking, your own experiences. So what are the kinds of common issues that you discovered from the survey that consumers are experiencing?
Yeah. And I think to kind of just level set when we talk about the insights from our survey, to give you an idea of the audience for our survey. So they had to have a mobile phone and a laptop and at least kind of 2 connected devices in their home. And they had to have an issue within the last 2 years because we didn't want to hypothetical service journeys, but we wanted to understand kind of the real service journeys. And so when we narrowed that audience down, what we found is in our survey was about 60% early adopters. And then the more common population, that's about 23%. So when we talk about these insights, these are coming from those early adopters, those tech savvy people. And so you can think about as the connected home moves into the mass production, kind of how this can be exacerbated as it moves into those other populations. So we found, a lot of interesting things around the issues are really out of the box. And again, for tech savvy consumers, they were really seeing issues with getting these things set up, be it a Ring doorbell or a Nest, but even more complexity and how do they work together? And that's really where we focused in the survey, is not on the point solutions, but more on the ecosystem service journey.
Interesting. What kind of stats did you see in terms of like the percentage of people that were actually having issues? Is it a low percent? Is it a high percent? What were you seeing there?
Yeah, we saw about 1/3 of the people had an issue in the past 2 years. And of those issues, kind of primarily, they were in that setup. And that was about 35% difficulty in connecting to their internet. Configuring settings was another 30%. So really, again, in that setup. And we were surprised that it was like 1/3 of all consumers with at least 2 connected devices had an issue in the past 2 years. But maybe not surprising, thinking through kind of the complexity of getting them all to kind of work together and uncovering that value that we know exists within the connected home.
That's my thought, Autumn. That doesn't surprise me, actually. I mean, it's good to see it validated in a survey like this, but that doesn't surprise me. And in terms of the types of technology products that were included in the survey, you said that they were primarily mobile devices, things like smartphones and Wi-Fi routers. Is that the kind of thing we're looking at?
Yeah. So it could have been any connected device in your home, from a smart TV to a Nest to a smart refrigerator to the Ring doorbell. So we had all of those. It could also be your streaming TV. So any connected device in the home was included as part of the survey.
So let's get into some of the really surprising results because, I did get a chance to kind of scan through some of the data. You really had some surprises. What were some of those surprises?
Yeah, I think, and again, once you think through it, maybe it wasn't so surprising, but we asked a question around, we called it technology deprivation tolerance. And basically what that is how long would a consumer feel comfortable being without a device or a service? And what we found there is the Wi-Fi router was the number one thing that people could not go without for a very long period of time. Over 65% of the people said it couldn't be without it for more than 24 hours. Second on that was smartphone, which wasn't as surprising to me. But if you think about the Wi-Fi router is really kind of the central nervous system. And so once we thought about it, it made sense, but that was a little bit surprising to us. The other kind of big surprising takeaway is when we asked about what was your service journey, and we gave people like 20 different options, starting from self-help, ask your neighbor, what was the number one thing that people went to was reading the manual. And we were really surprised that that even existed. I don't know the last time I've read a manual, but that was really surprising that, again, these tech-savvy consumers were going to a manual first. So those were two of kind of the key kind of takeaways we had that were a little bit surprising.
It's funny. I keep the manual. In fact, I have them all in one location. So I can pretty much put my hands on the manual of just about any device that I own. But then, of course, ask me, Autumn, if I've read it or the last time I've read it, to your point. So the fact that you said 59%, is that what you said? They'll read the manual?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That is fascinating. Okay. What about the role of online content like YouTube and FAQs or whatever it may be? What role did that play in the customer journey?
Yeah, so a couple of things there. So we asked the customers from the perspective of two lenses. One is ease or convenience of the different options within a service journey, and the other was how effective they were. And so ranking to the top of convenience and effectiveness was YouTube. And that was another surprising element to me. But if you think about how content is being delivered, maybe not so surprising again, but YouTube was the preferred content delivery mechanism. And we're actually seeing some of our clients really grab onto this, either through sponsoring their own channel, which requires obviously a lot of content creation. But we also see them kind of taking on some of the super users and really working the crowdsourcing element to improve service and deliver it in a way that consumers obviously like to have that delivered. So that's an interesting shift. And kind of as we think about digital transformation is content delivery through YouTube for onboarding, for setup, for service. And so that was a pretty interesting element. Probably not good for our clients. Kind of the number 3 and number 4 for ease and convenience was actually returning the product. And that's obviously where we don't want to end the journey, but it is convenient. No one's made it more convenient than Amazon. So that is an expectation that consumers have. And I recently read an article that said if they can't get it up and running with a device within 30 minutes, they're like 50% more likely to return that. So there's a high level of service that consumers expect right out of the box, or they will return it. So those were kind of the surprising elements on that convenience and effectiveness lens.
Interesting. It kind of speaks to the impatience that we all have. We expect everything to just work now in a matter of seconds or minutes. So that's interesting. What are some of the most common issues that are causing frustration among consumers? And, I have to admit, I'm not in a connected home, so I probably wouldn't have qualified. In fact, I know I wouldn't have qualified for the survey. But just in terms of a user of mobile devices and other tech devices, I can only imagine what some of the common issues were. What did you see in the survey?
Yeah, it was configuration settings, getting, even the installation of some of these are difficult, understanding the home requirements for certain devices. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there so that when a consumer is purchasing a product, they know whether, they're going to have to make changes to their home, their architecture within their home. Getting the devices to work friendly with one another continues to be a pain point, and just kind of that setup and installation. There's also an interesting kind of underpinning here of, did the device do what I thought it was going to do? Did it add value, the value that I thought? And I think this is probably, just something that happens as new and emerging technology kind of starts to be adopted. If you think back to the mobile phones and the initial launch of that, who would have thought I needed email on my phone or the value of that? So I think we're learning where consumers want to have value in these connected to devices and how the expectation around how they work really well together. So those were kind of the biggest kind of specific problems and issues that we uncovered specific to the connected home.
Okay. And what would you say is the biggest impact on the brands, the manufacturers of these home connected devices that have to work within an ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great point, Bernie. It's an interesting environment because you have the original equipment manufacturers for the point devices that have, are thinking about their brand from how does a consumer feel about the smart TV they bought from Samsung, for example. And that's one device within their home. But now what they have to contend with is how the consumer feels about their brand working with all the other brands. And so it's a complex environment for original equipment manufacturers because they don't have control over necessarily all the other elements in the home. We're also seeing, I call it the fight for the home. You see your telecom providers, your insurance providers, your security providers, even utilities kind of coming into the space and trying to create one packaged solution to support your home environment for kind of that monthly recurring revenue stream for them. But that's an extremely complex service journey for those companies as well, because they don't actually necessarily know the devices within the home. They know the backbone of the home. And so it's a really interesting time for a service company like iQor to be in this space as we help our clients really redefine what does that service journey need to look like with the complexity of all the different devices and the ISP and all the elements that can go wrong within the home. So it's a really interesting time to be in the space.
Yeah, I'd say that's an understatement, Autumn, to say the least. All right, terrific. Well, where I want to go next is to dive a little bit deeper into what consumers are actually doing to solve their issues. So we'll do that after the break. But first, I want to pause briefly for a message from our sponsor, SAP. SAP has trained 12,000 sales reps across the globe in social selling strategies. SAP sales reps are skilled at identifying buying signals in social media, engaging prospects in sales conversations, differentiating themselves from competition, and leveraging a technology-driven sales process. The result is sales reps at SAP who use social selling practices have more than 5 times bigger deals on average than those who don't. To learn how SAP has implemented and maintains their global social selling program and what's next on this, get the case study in Social Business Journal Volume 11. It's available for download without a form to fill out at vengreso.com/SAP. That's Savvy Social Selling the SAP way, available for download ungated at vengreso.com/SAP. So, Autumn, what insights did this survey provide in terms of how consumers are actually solving these issues?
Yeah, probably not surprising again with the tech savvy consumers that we had is that all of them prefer to start in, I would call a self-help mode. And we talked about reading the manual, which is self-help, but also visiting websites. We talked about going to YouTube, going to expert forums. And so it was interesting to see the amount of time they're willing to spend in that self-help space, which could be over an hour or so before they actually then reach out to a company like iQor. We call that kind of the customer support part of the journey. And that typically happens in the middle of the customer getting to a resolution. So by the time they reach us, they've been through an hour or so of self-help. We obviously don't have any knowledge of that. And so part of our value proposition is how do we meet the consumer where they understand where they've been and meet them in a place and deliver kind of the service outcome the way that they're looking for. So while 78% of consumers took a step in the customer service part of that, and that could be called an actual telephone, did a chat, did an email, any of the voice or non-voice options. Well, 78% of them did that. It was in the middle of their journey. And then kind of the back end of the journey is either you had to have it repaired or, as I mentioned, obviously some of them end in that return element. But, what we found is over the full survey that they took about 8 steps in that journey. And as I mentioned, there's about 20 steps. So they're taking a lot of steps and spending a lot of time. The patience was a big insight, the level of patience that consumers had to really try to solve the problem, not only on their own, but even in the customer support journey.
8 steps is a lot. That's a lot of patience.
Yeah.
That's a whole lot of patience. What about the number of companies involved? Because in a connected home, as you pointed out earlier, it can be multiple devices across multiple companies. So do you have data on how many companies are involved in that journey?
Yes. And this was a big point of frustration in the overall service journey. And as we talked about, Bernie, even if your cell phone was to have a problem, are you calling the cell phone manufacturer? Are you calling the retailer you bought it from? Are you calling the carrier? And so what we found is that complexity really was validated. And we found that on average, these consumers are having to deal with at least 2 different companies. And over that, they're having to take 3 separate sessions and talk to over 3 different people. And one of the big frustrations, obviously, is my information's not being passed from one person to the next. I'm having to repeat myself. So, this is validation of what we saw happening within iQor, but it's pretty eye-opening when you think about what we put consumers through to actually get their device up and running again.
Yeah, well, as soon as you said the information not passed from one to the next, I think most of us can relate to that. I know certainly I've had that experience, and I think, most of us have. So what about returns? How big of a contribution to the journey is product returns?
Yeah, so returning the product was over 22% of the time they returned it for a refund. And then we saw 25% of the time they just returned it with a new device, so the returns is a big part of the journey. And that's the unfortunate part and the part we try to work with our clients on to understand how do we meet the consumer at the point of opening the box, because that we know is the biggest point of frustration, to help that onboarding process become a lot more seamless and frictionless for them.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe about 1,000 people were in the survey who qualified. Is that right?
Yeah. So for some of our questions, pre kind of the actual service journey, we had about 6,000 people. So some of these survey questions have an N of 6,000. But yeah, when we got down to all of the different criteria, it was just a little over 1,000 people that had the problem within the 2 years with the 2 connected home devices.
Okay. So what insights do you have on the demographics of those people and sort of how that plays into the whole customer journey?
Yeah, so some of the demographic insights, we found and it was a good split, like a third of what we'll call baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials. But some of the interesting insights there were the millennials were the most patient. They were willing to take over 9 different steps, and 3 of those being kind of that customer service range, where the baby boomers were the least patient, but still willing to go through about 6 steps on that journey. Another kind of gender demographic we looked at when we asked the questions around security concerns or heightened dependence on technology. And so the younger generations were less concerned with security. So the millennials, when we asked the question of, are you concerned someone might hack into an interconnected device in your home or infiltrate your home? About 62% of the millennials said they were worried about that, where the baby boomers, it was 79%. But across the board, all generations, about 50% answer the question that they're concerned about the heightened dependence on technology to conduct daily tasks, which gets to that technology deprivation question we asked earlier. So there were a few generational differences, gender differences where men were more patient than women and going through steps, there wasn't a huge gender difference in the insights, and the types of problems were the same across. So those setup, configuration, we didn't see a huge difference in generation or gender there.
Interesting. And you said that they were all concerned with a heightened dependence on, is it connected devices or mobile devices?
The question was worded in all technology, and it was really around trying to understand how dependent people feel that if they didn't have their technology devices, they wouldn't be able to conduct kind of their daily tasks. And that makes sense, obviously, with mobile phones and laptops. And so they all felt the same kind of heightened dependence on technology that across the generations.
Okay. So my last question, Autumn, before I segue to my summary is, having conducted this survey, the CPX 360 survey, what are some of the lessons and takeaways for you as iQor being in the business of being a service provider? What are the big lessons learned for your company?
Yeah. So when we ask the question specific to what do you expect in a customer journey, how important is it, and how are we performing to that? The biggest area that had the biggest gap was if repairs are necessary, if I have to let go of my device, do I have status updates along the way? This was the most important aspect in the service journey for the consumers that took the survey and had the biggest gap. It had about a 35-point gap between what their expectation was and what they're actually seeing, along with what we talked about as far as not having information go across that service journey. And so that's really where iQor plays a unique role for our clients, not only in helping them construct a better customer journey and thinking about the ecosystem, but in really tying that I'm the person that took the call, I'm the person that chatted with you, I'm the person that's actually picking your device up and repairing your device and getting it back to you, and creating that end-to-end seamless journey for consumers where they feel connected all the way through is really the big takeaway from the survey and where we can add the most value.
Interesting. That makes total sense. I can certainly understand why that would be a huge takeaway. So, all right. Well, speaking of takeaways, let's get to my summary. And what I do here, Autumn, is I attempt to kind of summarize the key topics that we discussed about the survey. And I'm going to ask you to kind of fill in any holes, or if I jog your memory on a point you want to make, feel free, and then we'll bring this podcast to a wrap. We began our conversation with an introduction to your company, iQor. You are a company that provides service and support to brands around the world, everything from welcome calls to back office and product support. And you have over 45,000 employees across 60 plus countries and service companies across a variety of different industries, including manufacturers, media, banking, financial services. And you've got a big role at iQor. You head up global marketing, enterprise solutions, and integrated offerings. And you recently conducted the Customer and Product Experience 360 survey. I would imagine 360 stands for like the full view of the customer journey. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So the CPX 360 journey, and it was really about understanding the complexity in the connected home device space. You surveyed consumers to really learn what their issues are in their journey. And so it really helped you understand and validate the things that they're experiencing. And so you shared that most of the people that are experiencing issues in the journey are sort of early adopters, tech savvy. Like you said, 60% of them are early adopters. And it's things around like getting things set up and how do they work together. And about a third of the people that were surveyed had issues. The kinds of things that they're struggling with are smart devices that are connected, Wi-Fi routers, smart TVs, smart refrigerators, and other smartphones, et cetera, all those things that are connected in the home together. And some of the things that were kind of surprising is that the Wi-Fi is the number one most dependent device in the connected home. More than 60% said they couldn't do without it for more than 24 hours, followed second by the smartphone, which actually I thought that would have been reversed, at least for me anyway. I'd rather have my smartphone because I know I can at least tap into the network.
We were surprised by that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the service journey, 59% of the people still read the user manual. That's really, really interesting. And then in terms of what's most effective for people, it's really things like accessing content on YouTube to try to resolve problems, crowdsourcing with other people. And then the third one, which is probably the most unfortunate one, is returning the product. But it is convenient because that's, one of the three things that were the easiest and effective way to resolve issues in their journey. In terms of things that are causing frustration, things like configuration settings and really understanding the home ecosystem requirements and how to get all the devices to work together, particularly since oftentimes they're from different manufacturers. And even things like, did the device do what the consumer expected it to do? And just a lack of understanding of how to make them connect and work together and the whole multiple devices working together on the consumer journey. We talked a little bit about the impact on the brands, how the brands have to really understand how the consumer feels about making these devices work together. You mentioned the concept of the fight for the home. And I think it's an interesting point, Autumn, because it kind of goes outside the realm of the manufacturers of the devices. But you've got, to your point, you've got telecom companies and utilities and insurance companies all trying to come into the home and offer packages, but they don't always know the devices. They may know peripheral or infrastructure things, but not necessarily the devices. So that makes it kind of interesting as well as challenging. In terms of how consumers solve their issues, we just mentioned, self-help, website, YouTube forums, that kind of thing. And then most consumers had an average of 8 steps on their journey. First one being self-help, but 22% of them returned the device for a refund and 25% returned it for a new device. So very, very interesting. And then from a demographic standpoint of the people who actually took the survey, we said roughly 1,000 people who qualified with home devices. The youngest demographic were the most patient and willing to invest in the journey. They were also the least concerned with security, whereas the boomers were more concerned with security and they were less patient, 6 steps versus 8 steps in their journey, but all concerned with a heightened dependency on technology. And I find it very interesting that men were more patient in the journey. Very, very interesting. And then if repairs are necessary, then what you learned from the survey at iQor is that when repairs are necessary, it really is about keeping the customer updated along the way on their journey. It really helps you at iQor understand how consumers want to be serviced so that you can deliver a more seamless experience and really provide that holistic view of, again, the customer journey within the entire ecosystem. So, Autumn, that's my summary. Is there anything that you would like to add?
No, that was excellent. Recap, Bernie. That's perfect.
All right. Thank you. Well, Autumn, this has been a fantastic conversation. Very, very insightful. We will link up in our show notes. I know that you've got a really nice video that you're on that's on the iQor website. We'll link that up in our show notes page. Where would you like to send my listener online to either connect with you and learn more about what you've got going on at iQor?
I think we can direct them to our website or our LinkedIn pages or my personal LinkedIn page. And we're also, heavy users of Twitter and Instagram. So I think we can lead them to all those, or I can check with Robert on which one he would prefer.
Fantastic. Well, we will absolutely confirm with Robert what to link up, and that my listener knows that will be linked up in our show notes page at vengreso.com. Well, Autumn, thank you so much for joining me here today on this episode of the Social Business Engine podcast.
Thanks, Bernie.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Autumn Braswell, Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, Enterprise Solutions at iQor. This has been episode 214, titled The Truth About the Consumer's Journey with Connected Home Devices. Now, my one big takeaway from my conversation with Autumn is the challenge that we all face as a product or service provider in providing a customer journey experience that needs to be seamless across the entire ecosystem. Now, in this scenario that we discussed, the ecosystem is connected home devices such as Wi-Fi routers and mobile phones and voice assistants such as Amazon Echo and Google Home, among other devices. But truly, it doesn't matter if your brand sells home devices or insurance or B2B technology or events, doesn't matter. The customer journey almost always touches other brands, which together makes up the ecosystem of that customer's journey. So brands need to have a 360-degree mindset, like the name of this survey by iQor, CPX 360. So what's your takeaway from my conversation with Autumn Braswell? Just visit the podcast section at vengreso.com to find episode 214 and leave your comments. Hey, I want to remind you that the Social Business Engine podcast is available at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and Spotify. Be sure to subscribe using your favorite podcast player because we publish a new episode each and every Wednesday. Hey, this episode is sponsored by SAP. Social Business Journal Volume 11 is a case study in savvy social selling the SAP way. This case study is available for download without a form to fill out. Just click to open the PDF in your browser at vengreso.com/SAP. We'll link that up in the show notes page at vengreso.com/podcast. And hey, while you're there, be sure to subscribe to get the Social Business Engine podcast delivered to your inbox each and every week. And if you're in sales or you know someone in sales, be sure to subscribe to my partner's podcast, Selling with Social, hosted by Vengreso's CEO, Mario Martinez Jr. Well, hey, that's a wrap for episode 214. I want to thank my guest once again, Autumn Braswell, Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer, Enterprise Solutions at iQor. This is Bernie Borges, CMO of Vengreso, signing off for now and wishing you continued success on your social business journey.
Thank you for listening to the Social Business Engine podcast. Be sure to tune in again next week to reconnect with Bernie Borges for more insights, inspiration, and practical advice on social business. Visit socialbusinessengine.com to catch even more content on social strategy that will rock your business and your career.